Welcome. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Daniel Davis. We're approaching the Christmas season, and for most people that means a large abundance of consumerism and sometimes expectation that we can't fulfill or feel fulfilled by. Well, let's see if we can go ahead and recapture that spirit again in something a little bit deeper, maybe getting back to what the original holiday was intended for, which was togetherness, peace, love, and harmony. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program is a wonderful guest today who's going to share with us his book, Simple Gifts. It's One Man's Search for Grace. And joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program is author Bill Henderson. Just to give you a little idea of who he is the winner of the 2006 Ivan Sandroff Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Book Critics Circle and the recipient of the Poets and Writers Barnes & Noble Writers for Writers Award. He's also been a professor and teacher at such places as Columbia, Radcliffe, and Princeton University, and he's joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program to talk with us about his book, Simple Gifts, One Man's Search for Grace. And Bill Henderson, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
Well, I'm glad to be with you.
Now, this is really a neat book because of the rich history that you share about one simple type of music that sometimes gets overlooked, but when people encounter it or participate in it, there's no doubt that it's timeless, and these are simply known as hymns. Let's talk about what those are.
Well, there are the old hymns that come to us from centuries past, and then there are the more modern praise songs, which I think perhaps in many cases are not lasting, but that's always been the case with many songs. There was a lady named Fanny Crosby who wrote some of our most remembered hymns, and she wrote 7,000 hymns. Needless to say, most of those hymns have been forgotten. But the hymns are usually, for me anyway, those deep old hymns from deep in my history and the country's history, and that move us profoundly just because they're so much a part of our past. So those are the hymns I talk about in Simple Gifts.
Now, as people go into this book, it's really interesting because, of course, one of the most popular hymns that people know of, and you've broken this into three types of categories. Let's talk about what those are and why you decided to do that.
Well, it was a matter of desperation, the truth. I had been working on this book for 5 years, and I had so much material, and I didn't really know how to organize it, but the very simple things about my life are that I believe in love and wonder, and the simplicity of that, of those two words. So I decided to divide the book into simplicity, love, and wonder. And the simple songs of simplicity are the ones I lead off with, such as the Shaker hymn, Simple Gifts. The Shakers, as perhaps we remember, because they're mostly all gone now, although a small colony still survives in Maine. I think there are 5 people there. They believed, above all, in total simplicity. That's why we admire their furniture. That perhaps in our consumer society, which is all we've got left to admire, is simple furniture. But their lives were very simple. They were celibate, and they loved to dance, not boy-girl, but in separate groups in the same room. And the Simple Gifts was a quick dance and a very simple song, which was apparently brought to them from beyond, as we would call, the secular people might call it a muse, and they would say it was a gift from God. So that's the title, Simple Gifts. Mm-hmm. So that's where the simplicity came from, and then there are the songs of wonder, of which I include many, and I would certainly, the most famous song of wonder to me is Amazing Grace. Grace is a source of wonder. Why do we deserve grace? Where does it come from? And why is Amazing Grace the world hymn? That is another huge story, which I'd be glad to share with you. And there are the songs of love, which is the concluding section of the book, relying on the prayer of St. Francis, make me a channel of your peace, which is a Catholic hymn, but it's taken from the life, if not the actual words of St. Francis, a song of love. So those are the divisions of my little book about hymns.
Now, what's really fascinating about this book, too, Bill, is the rich history that you put into it. You show the source of how the hymn comes about. You kind of break into it showing its meaning, but then you realize as you come to understand the essence of what these are, that these, although may have sprouted from perhaps a particular religious tradition, they're not really religious in tenure, like attached to the particular place they may have sprung from. They become very universal very quickly.
And that's very important to me in this book. I don't want to have any hymns that I appreciate, and certainly there are hymns that I don't appreciate here, and I don't include them for the most part. But these are hymns that are world hymns to me. They reach out to all people. I don't care what you believe in. Anybody can sing them and have a sense of the divine, such as Amazing Grace, and in which the name of Jesus is never mentioned, by the way, although John Newton was a minister and he'd written other hymns. But in Amazing Grace, this is a song anybody can sing about the love of God which comes upon us suddenly and very unexpectedly, and we don't really deserve it. But that's the sort of hymns I appreciate in this book. It is songs that reach out, not that define or exclusionary or other things such, and certainly not military hymns like Onward Christian Soldiers, which I cannot even begin to sing.
I know I was just watching the John Wayne movie True Grit, and I don't know if you've, but right in the beginning of the movie, they're ready to hang these people, and you see the whole crowd gathered around singing Amazing Grace, and you wonder that you're taking a look at this, but where is the deeper meaning, in that particular situation? But you realize that it's a way that you spiritually uplift maybe somebody who feels they're at the end of their rope, if you will, and try to bring them a little buoyance or even flight if you can. Yeah.
It's Amazing Grace is sung just about everywhere except at football games, I think.
Which is where they should it, since they have the the Statue of Liberty pass anyway. So
that's Hail Mary. Yeah.
Now, how did you decide on the particular hymns that you have in your book here? Because as you said, you had a lot of material to work with, so I could see how this could be an extremely daunting task.
Well, I literally went through all the hymnals I could find. I was shameless in going to the churches and borrowing or asking to borrow hymnals and just reading every hymn. And I broke out my old trumpet from my high school days, which I could barely play. And the ones I remembered, I was brought up in a very religious household and left the church for a long time. The hymns I remembered, I'd play on my trumpet and I'd read the words and sing them. And I was looking for perfect hymns, and the hymns that not only were, according to my vision or lack of it, were perfect in words and also in music. That's what I would call the hymns that I included in this little book. What I was looking out for were fake rhymes, particularly. Often the hymn maker would attempt just to rhyme things at the end, would twist theology so that fright might rhyme with night or something like that, or moon or spoon, or they would just twist their message to make a neat little package. So those hymns didn't make it into the book. But the hymns that I do have in the book, I think are, in my mind, perfect, with flaws. Everybody has flaws. You have to weave that flaw into the rug, or God will be angry with you.
A little upset until you sing him a good song anyway. So
that's right. Yeah.
Now, how did you come to discover the history behind each of these hymns, and perhaps even the person or persons who created them?
Well, that took a little footwork in libraries and such. There are many books out about the Shakers, for instance. The Shakers were glorified in the 30s. Appalachian Spring by Aaron Copland was that he actually borrowed the Simple Gifts hymn for Appalachian Spring, the ballet, which we all remember. there's a wonderful book out called Amazing Grace, recently published about 4 or 5 years ago, which is the whole history of Amazing Grace. And St. Francis was not at all hard to research because there are tons of books about this amazing, wonderful person from the 12th century. So you kind of dig in there and find what it is about them. They're all fascinating people. For instance, the Shakers were founded by a lady, Mother Ann Lee, who was born in Manchester, England, and was forced to marry her father forced her to marry his apprentice. She had 4 children. They all died right away, and before they were 5. So she was a member of the Quakers, and a new group there, persecuted, of course. And she became so fervent that she started a group called the Shakers because they became overwhelmed. They were named Shakers because they would start to shake. And she and a group of few people who she declared sex to be the enemy of everything, the original sin. So she got 12 people to sail with her to America. It wasn't America yet. It was 1775, and they arrived here without a dime. Were thought to be English spies. They journeyed up the Hudson River to the area of Albany and almost froze to death, but the Indians saved them. And she started her little sect up there, and she declared herself to be the second female coming of Jesus, which, of course, would get you shot or burned in those days, but somehow she pulled it off. And she had other shocking ideas, like the revelation of the second coming of Jesus was not going to come as it is in the book of Revelation. It was happening all the time, every day, in every person's heart, which I think is a wonderful idea. And gradually her sect caught on up there. There was a huge gathering of Baptists. It was noised about that Jesus was coming back, and he was coming back in upstate New York. And so they had a huge convention.
Maybe looking for Woodstock.
Yeah, that's right. That's probably where that came from. And anyway, they had a huge gathering of Baptist ministers near Mother Ann's little compound. And, of course, Jesus didn't show up. He was a no-show. Mm-hmm. But on the way back to New York, these ministers stopped off to visit her and were so impressed by her. And her fame began to spread, and she became a missionary for her own religion, or her own brand of religion, and traveled all around New England and had many converts. Many people were sick of marriage or something. And they just said, we're not going to have sex anymore. We'll give all our stuff to Mother Ann. And they formed communes and lived a simple life and danced the simple dance and praised Jesus all day long. It was they were true believers in a very beautiful way.
I know it's interesting as I was reading through the book Simple Gifts, when you talk about the Shakers, is you seem to have a lot of respect for who they are, even in comparison with other religious affiliations in some ways. Yeah, well,
I think they were essentially, some people really, really try to live their religion. I wish I were one of them. I give it a bash.
Most of us are always looking for that gray area, though.
yeah. And now and then I even go shopping for, but they really, really were honest people, and I don't know, they weren't trying to shade the truth, and they really tried to live like they thought Christ would want them to live. Mm-hmm. And the other person in the book, there are many, many people in the book, but I'm talking about in the major sections, is St. Francis, of course, who I didn't know much about St. Francis when I began to research this, but I know I was incredibly moved by Make Me a Channel of Your Peace, in that the hymn, which is said to be the words of St. Francis. Frankly, I doubt that St. Francis ever prayed this prayer, but it's based on his life exquisitely. And he was a man who gave up all possessions, thought money was worse than dog shit, and would not touch it, would not allow any of his followers to get near money, who lived in an ecstasy of love, who refused clothing except for the basic things that wouldn't get you arrested, The funny thing is, his father was a high-end Ralph Lauren of his time
Wow.
in Italy, and this is one of the great Freudian dramas that he so ultimately, and his father was rich, he totally rejected his father and wandered around with his new father, which is God, and through Jesus. His motto was, "I follow the naked Christ," and he was nearly naked his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And because the church was so corrupt in his time, and he kept accusing them of being corrupt, which they were, money hungry and
Self-righteous, exactly.
Yes, of course, and people had it with the Catholic Church at the time. There were many rebellious groups, but Francis wanted to stay in the church because of the Eucharist. He had to have that link with Jesus, and so he never gave it up, but he always was very rough on the church. And he had huge followings of people who tried to live the simple, honest, naked Jesus life. And when he died, of course, they built him, the church moved in, rewrote his biography, built him a huge basilica, and and just took over and made him one of their saints, so that now you find giant churches named after St. Francis and all these things he would utterly have gotten sick about if he would return today, as I suspect would Jesus if he came back and saw what was done in his name. It makes me sick enough from time to time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that's what's interesting, too, is that when you take a look at these simple gifts, as your book is titled here, is that you see a purity and a sense of the soul connecting with God, if you will, versus the symbolism that the church has converted into a way to God through them. In other words,
right.
You're bypassing the middleman, which basically can make you feel bad enough using them in the first place versus the direct connection. And it seems like Walt Whitman even had it right. Just take a walk in the woods and kind of abandon society's ideals of how you connect with your creator. Just simply do it through this, and you'll find yourself found, so to speak.
Exactly. Just go look at a blade of grass in your backyard. That you can find God in that. It's very simple, and the Irish call it the thin places, and hymns take us to these thin places where the difference between the divine and human life is very thin, where you feel you're brushing up against heaven, if you will, and that's what hymns do to me. Great hymns, of course. Bad hymns make you feel like terrible. But,
I've had too much coffee, or this is really a bad hymn.
yeah. As to bad sermons, you just religion. Church can be bad for your religious life, I think.
Now, Bill, I was kind of curious. Now, let's talk about the hymns from a more of a cultural standpoint of view. Now, these don't just simply come from, say, England or Britain. Where are some of the sources that really lend its color, if you will, that shows that all cultures really have a sameness to themselves?
These hymns come from far back in time. One from 700, the year 700.
Wow!
And of course, the Catholic Church in the old days decided to stamp out singing, which was pagan, and decided only the priest could chant, and the likes of us could just sit there and listen, and that's where you find Gregorian chant, which is very beautiful, of course. And it was actually Martin Luther that came along and decided that hymns were wonderful. Martin Luther, for all his faults, anti-Semitism and major among them, and a certain political conniving, loved hymns and demanded that the people in his churches sing. Which I think was just, we can praise him for that. And that's where the Protestant tradition of singing comes from. Many of these great hymns owe their life to Martin Luther. He was a kind of a lusty fellow, and he liked to bellow and bellow out hymns. So.
I know when you talk about singing in church, that was one of those areas when I did go that I always, for some reason, felt uncomfortable until I was in a Pentecostal church. And I said, boy, these guys really have it going on here. This seems like fun. And it actually felt fun and energizing versus the old woe is me kind of a thing here. But
yeah,
another story all in and of itself.
yeah.
As you were putting this book together, Bill, what would you say was, I mean, you've already shared some really fascinating stories, but what was the one that really, I guess, was aligned with you?
You know, the first hymn. Well, as I say, I was out of the church for a long time, since I was age 14 or so, and discovered Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, and particularly Thoreau, who led me into the woods, and which was a major revelation. And I just my father could not understand what I was doing, and I couldn't understand why he believed that you had to believe in Jesus to be saved, and all the rest of it. And his was a very uncomplicated religion, and he was a very good man. Didn't want to think about much, and real shy. So I was gone from the church for a long time, until I was about 40, and my daughter was born, and we moved out here on the eastern end of Long Island and New York. And my wife, who's not particularly religious, but was brought up a bit in the church, mostly as a social event, decided that our daughter, should go down to the little tiny chapel down the road and learn some basics of civilization, such as going to church and dressing up. And I thought that was terrific, but I didn't want anything to do with the church. I actually was very angry, and I thought it was all a bunch of superstition and nonsense. And these people didn't want to think, and they were cramped, and I would have nothing to do with it. But on the day of my conversion, as I call it, there was a huge snowstorm out here, and my wife and daughter were headed off into this blizzard down the road, which is only a mile, to the little church. And I said, no, you're not going. And she said, yes, we are going. And so I said, fine, I'm driving you. And I drove them down to the little church and walked in the door just to protect my little family, who I love dearly, and my whole life. And I found myself in this church which had been abandoned by organists. The organist couldn't get there. In fact, there were only about 10 people in the little chapel, and we all started to sing, and it just hit me. I began to gasp for breath, and it just recognition, I guess. But the point is, I don't remember what hymn it was we were singing, and when just recognition hit me. So I can't name that hymn, but after that it all changed. And I was very glad to be back in that little church, and I found that in the intervening 30 years since I'd been inside a church, a lot had changed, or I had changed, and I found the people to be wonderful, and very thoughtful, and very welcoming, and terrific people. So I became, actually, in not too long, an elder in that church. I still am. Oh,
there you go. Ready to create your own new hymn for redemption and rediscovery, so to speak.
So I'm sure there are religious groups in this country which are obnoxious with their doctrinaire, my way or the highway sort of thing. But I find a lot in common with many people. In summer, I go to church in Maine. I have a little cabin on a hill in mid-coast Maine, and there's a congregational church there. Again, a great bunch of people and great music. And it's something I think that people who are outside the church should look at and just lower their guard a bit about religion, because we tend to, and even I, get very angry, excruciatingly angry when things like 9/11 happened in the name of religion, or whatever these guys thought they were doing, or the Mumbai slaughter in the name of religion. But that's not what most religious people do or think. Most of it's about love and compassion. They try.
I know, Bill, it's interesting on that point, because sometimes I have what might seem to be a prejudice against Christians. However, I have found a lot of great Christians, so I think it's all about how they put their practice into play, where you see the hypocrisy versus the genuineness, and I think that's probably what had happened, because I myself have found, just like you, thinking the same way. How dare you be self-righteous about the way I'm living my life, thinking you've got the gateway to heaven, when in fact I'm probably closer to God than you are, just because you go to church every Sunday and Wednesday for Mass, and the idea that you should be able to live that way without judgment, and that's one of the 10 Commandments, is no judgment, but there seems to be a lot of it going on.
Yeah, that's true. But I found not much of that. In fact, my little church only has about 75 members down the road here in East Hampton. But I find a constant warning against judging anybody. From the pulpit, we've had many ministers. We can't keep them because we're so poor. So we have interim ministers. But they've a whole variety of them, warned against any of this holier than thou crap. The judge that don't judge so you won't be judged, and cast out the stone in your own eye before you start leaning on other people. It's a constant, and I find none of this holier than thou stuff. Of course, I wouldn't go to a church that had it in it.
Right.
That you see a president like our present one hanging out by his fingernails there in the White House, who proclaims himself to be a Christian and talk to God, and then bombs the hell out of Iraqi citizens.
Then calls himself a war president.
And the great decider, who was Jesus on his side. I mean, I think the man has had a lobotomy sometime back, how can this would drive many people away from the church if you see somebody who says, I'm a Christian, and Jesus, the most important philosopher in my life, as Bush did, and then he goes and slaughters people. You don't want to belong to this. You don't want to. Somebody should have patented the name Christian, because everybody used it to justify themselves, and I don't know. It's very extremely disappointing.
It's certainly a different subject for another book, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, again, the book is Simple Gifts. It's one man's search for grace. And do you feel now, it sounds to me like you've found it again?
Well, I try, as we all do. We try to find, and I try to keep on singing, which is what I advise everybody to do, and be aware of love and wonder everywhere around you.
Well, the fun thing, too, about hymns, and again, I haven't probably sang a hymn in forever, but the idea of singing itself is it's just a wonderful vibration that I believe is being man being made in the image of God, that vibration, that feeling of love, which is what it's really truly all about. Regardless of the situation you may be in, it has a way to uplift you, even if you're just listening to someone singing it in times of darkness. And certainly during Christmas time, I think it could be a time where people should kind of unite together and perhaps participate more in this and have themselves.
I recommend it. It's just great to be in a congregation of other people all singing together. It just does something to you, because you're united in a way that you never are in everyday life. You're that 100 people or whatever, or 5 people singing together. It's just wonderful. And we don't get to sing much anymore. We all sit there and listen to the crap on our TVs and our radios, but when do we get to sing? It's
outside of the bad karaoke night where people are certainly trying.
Yeah, do the karaoke thing, but I don't know if that's going to lift you.
Certainly give you a laugh from time to time to realize that you were dumb enough to sit through it. Well, Bill Henderson, it's been a pleasure to have you on a program today. Again,
Thanks.
The book is Simple Gifts, One Man's Search for Grace. Is there a website people can find out more about what you're up to and doing?
Well, I run a little press called Pushcart Press, and there's a website, pushcartpress.org, O-R-G, pushcartpress.org. Lists all my books and what I'm up to, blah, blah. So it's there. And Simon & Schuster published the book, so you can get it from your local independent bookstore, I hope, or Amazon. They will have Simple Gifts.
Very good. Well, Bill Henderson, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program, and I hope you and your family have a wonderful holiday as well.
Thank you. Same to you now. Okay,
You bet.
Take care. Bye.
All right, that's it. Get back to singing. Get back to connecting with your source. Simple Gifts, One Man's Search for Grace. A lot of great stories behind these hymns that are in this book, too. You would think at first, hymns, oh, no, it's one of them religious things. But no, it's way more than that. Very, very enjoyable reading. Again, Simple Gifts, One Man's Search for Grace. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. Be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50, and sign up for our free newsletter. You can also email me directly. We do welcome your questions or comments about our radio program and even your participation. And that's simply Daniel at beyond50radio.com. Thank you for tuning in today. Hope you all have a wonderful holiday. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.